Good evening, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our second Connections about deaf education and professionals throughout Tennessee. This evening, we have our special and favorite audiologist here. Well, really, we have two favorite audiologists here, but one of them is only present tonight. Krista Froling. She's worked for Tennessee schools for many years, 33 years. That's a long time. That's a long career. She became a special education audiologist here at the Tennessee School for the Deaf 20 years ago. A graduate student from Memphis, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I supervise them, but yeah.
To provide newborn hearing tests and screenings from birth to 3.
Mm-hmm.
To show them the audiological process from 5 and up. And to work with many different schools in the areas. For each Tennessee School for the Deaf system. We want to welcome and give Krista time to present, and we hope that you enjoy it. Audiology 101.
Ready? Hi, I'm Krista. Thank you for the introduction, Jack. I appreciate that. For everybody's here, I also appreciate you coming because it's hard to do this after a long day of work and then to come and sit down when you know you have a billion other things that you need to do. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to welcome questions at any time. Just put them in the chat and Becky will let me know when there's a question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. I don't believe that. I think all questions are good. I'm an educational audiologist, and this presentation will be from that point of view, just to let you know. And I'm part of the statewide school support team at TSD, which provides collaborative support for the educational team in meeting the needs of students who are deaf and hard of hearing in schools across Tennessee. And Becky Candino, my trusted chat checker, is also on that team. And I'm happy to say we keep pretty busy doing that. We're going to go have a visit tomorrow, so that'll be exciting. All right. I'm trying to advance my slides. Hang on a second. There we go. Woohoo! These are the things we're going to touch on. And if there's any of these that you want to know more, please let me know. But also, I will put my contact information at the end of this presentation. And I welcome, you can call me, email me if you want to have a private discussion or whatever. I'd be glad to do it. I can give you more information on anything that I talk about. There's a lot of forms and things that I can give you that I didn't include in the presentation. So I just want to let you know that you're more than welcome to ask me that. So, yay, there we go. Educational audiologist. We're members of the school team, and we facilitate listening, learning, and communication access. We monitor personal hearing instruments for students, recommend, fit, and manage hearing assistance technology like FM or remote mics. We provide and recommend support services and resources, and we advocate on behalf of the students, and a lot of times on behalf of the parents and the teachers. What little known things about us is that we can also counsel children to promote personal responsibility and self-advocacy, help them maintain student performance levels, We can collaborate with private sector audiologists, which we do that. We help students transition and team with other school professionals to work most effectively to facilitate student learning. We can also, in their scope of practices, help kids who have normal hearing, but maybe they're English as a second language learners, kids with learning disabilities, anything that if we can help make the listening environment better, we can help that student. And the primary goal is to ensure that all deaf and hard of hearing students have full access to communication, specifically auditory information in their learning environments, if that's what they want. And then, like I said, it's from an educational audiologist point of view. So that requires that children are identified, they are appropriately assessed, receive counseling and other support services to address their hearing status and educational needs. They have the appropriate technology, hearing technology, and assistive technology services. And then it's monitored regularly to ensure it's properly functioning, because, you know, why have it if it's not going to work? So the dynamic range of the ear, the dynamic range of hearing, in frequency, Hz means hertz. So it goes from 20 to 20,000 hertz. That's like what we can hear. Most people probably, most adults maybe can't hear beyond 16,000. And when we test hearing, we don't test beyond 8. And we're most concerned about the frequencies for speech, because that's why we want to hear. Intensity range is in decibels, and that's a logarithmic scale. So it's not just, you know, a little bit louder, but it's like 10 times louder as you go down on the audiogram, and we'll see that in a second. This is the audiogram. I don't know, hopefully everybody has seen this before, but hertz is on the top, on the horizontal, and intensity is on the vertical in decibels, and it's from the left to the right. Frequency or hertz is, it's low to mid to high. It goes from low to high. It's like a piano keyboard. So it's frequency we perceive as pitch. So it's low pitch, medium pitch, high pitch. And you can see it goes from 125, which is mostly, you can feel it, to 8,000 hertz. And then on the left, the intensity, which we perceive as loudness. And the farther you go down, the louder the sound. When you see the sounds of English right here, and I'm sorry, we usually do a little, we outline, because you've probably heard of the speech banana, but it's where the sounds in English. Something I've learned recently is they call it the string bean, and it's on top of the speech banana. And they believe that all kids should be hearing above that in order to get full auditory access to speech. So on the audiogram, like the leaves rustling, it's like mid frequency. So it's a medium pitch, and it's very soft. So if your hearing is at the top, like along 0, you can hear everything on the audiogram. But if you're hearing, if you just start to hear like at 40, you're going to miss most of the speech sounds. You're going to miss birds whistling and the faucet dripping, but most of us don't care about that. And then as it gets really, really loud, down along 120, oh, I don't know where that 440 came from. That looks like a typo. Then it gets so loud that it can start damaging your hearing. Even if you have a hearing loss, if you're exposed to sound that loud, you can further damage your hearing. Then, and as you can see, in the lower pitches, there's the vowel sounds, and in the higher pitches are the consonant sounds. So vowel sounds are high energy, low frequency. And consonant sounds are low energy, high frequency. And that will become important later on. So this is your ear, if cross section. You have the ear canal, the outer ear, the ear canal, the eardrum, the middle ear bones, the cochlea, and then the semicircular canals. A lot of people don't know that your balance system is in your ear. And then the auditory nerve, and then the auditory nerve goes to the brain. Probably within the last 20 years with imaging studies, they found that the ears you don't hear with your ears. The ears collect sound and sends it to the brain, and you hear with your brain. So it's all about brain hearing and giving access to the brain in order to hear. How we hear. So the sound source comes in, the sound waves goes into the outer ear, and the outer ear functions to protect the middle ear. It directs sound into the ear canal and enhances localization, helps you know where the sound is coming from. The outer ear serves to enhance the intensity of the sounds in the mid-frequency range, where the sound spectrum of speech is located. That's the main area where speech is. Then you get into the middle ear, which starts with the eardrum, and the sound waves travel to the inner ear and cause vibrations that are converted into energy. It just said my internet connection is unstable. I hope it's working for you guys. So it sends it through to the incus, the malleus, good, and the stapes, and then it sends the like pulses to the cochlea, and this energy is transformed to electrical nerve impulses once it hits the auditory nerve. And then in your cochlea you have little hair cells, and they help transmit the sound to the auditory nerve. And then those impulses are sent to the brain for decoding. And one of the main places of hearing loss is in those hair cells in the cochlea. Then once the sound travels on the auditory nerve to the brain, it transmits energy to the brain for interpretation. So your ears and your auditory pathways send all that information to the brain, and the brain goes, oh, that was a dog barking and the dog wants to go outside. That's what your brain does with that information. And there's a picture of the brain. There's your primary auditory cortex, and you have a secondary auditory cortex. And some people like to say that depending on where the auditory cortex is stimulated, that's the pitch that you're going to hear. So how does the auditory brain work? Well, the auditory cortex is directly involved in speech perception and language processing in humans. The normal maturation of the auditory pathways is a precondition. So they have to be mature, normally mature, for the normal development of speech and language skills in children. And I see this I do auditory processing evaluations in kids who have auditory pathways that are not maturing according to their age, have difficulties in the classroom. And then with all, like I said, with all the recent research and imagery, we're able to see important changes in the higher auditory centers, the auditory cortex, due to hearing loss or deafness. They see that with imaging, if that area isn't stimulated, then the brain will take that energy and put it to another cortex, usually visual. So it doesn't get rid of it, it just kind of repurposes it. And I also found out some recently too, thank you, Jack, for letting me go to all these conferences, is that if you ever see a white cat with blue eyes, they're always deaf because they're doing research on them. And this is auditory pathways, if you ever think it's easy and they cross. So I just wanted to show you that. All right, let's talk about hearing loss. Infant hearing loss. Every year, about 12,000 babies are born with hearing loss, or about 1 or 2 per 1,000. And 90, and you'll see, you know, every time I look something up, the numbers are a little bit different. But 90% of these babies are born to hearing parents. Roughly about 1/3 are genetic, 1/3 non-genetic, and 1/3 unknown. So why do they have a hearing impairment? Well, genetic, hereditary factors, Down syndrome, Usher syndrome, that's something that involves hearing loss and vision. Waardenburg syndrome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say it. There's anybody who knows Bonnie Raitt? She has Waardenburg syndrome, but because it's so variable, she doesn't have hearing loss, which we're very thankful for because she sings very well. But she does have it. So there you go. Okay.
I have
And
a question, Krista.
yes, Becky. Okay.
The reason why, or it's kind of a comment and a question. The reason
Okay.
why Krista says that is because Bonnie Raitt has a silver streak of hair.
Mm-hmm.
And the variability to Waardenburg is it can include deafness, but it usually always includes that silver streak of hair. And it can be at the back. I've seen it like in the nape of the neck. And I also have a friend who is a musician and he has a silver, you know, he's always had this streak of hair, but he has no deafness or anything and his eyes are not. But I've also seen the silver eyes with the silver streak and the deafness. So
Yes.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
always been very interesting to me, the variability with that genetic syndrome.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it with genetics just on their own. But I was also told that the silver or the white patch doesn't have to be on your hair. It can be like on your skin somewhere, like a white patch. That's what I was told. So
Interesting.
yeah, so it's fascinating. Okay, thank you. Infections, it used to be rubella, and it still is in some third world countries, but in our country, and it I can't remember what we were called. Anyway, developed countries, it's CMV, which stands for cytomegalovirus. It's a part of the herpes family, and it's very similar to rubella, and it can have variable outcomes. You can have hearing loss, or you can have other things like hearing and vision, or brain damage. It just depends. Otitis media, that's just recurring ear infections, fluid in the ears. Developmental abnormalities. Some kids are born like their ear is not completely developed, so they don't have an ear canal or an outside ear. Sometimes they don't have middle ear bones. Sometimes their cochlea is not developed. Environmental traumatic factors, loud noise, that could be like young kids, low birth weight, and that's linked with like prematurity. Prescription medication, there's a neonatal abstinence syndrome for babies who are born addicted to opioids, and the jury's still out on exactly what that does for hearing, but they think it can cause hearing loss. Head injuries, hope we don't see that too much. Genetic causes, a gene is inherited from a parent. 400 kinds have been identified. There's syndromic, which means there's other things that go with it, or non-syndromic, which is just a hearing loss itself. There's Usher's syndrome. And then I think Usher's is recessive. And then the CX26 gene mutation is connexin 26. And I know a lot of kids that have that. And it's also variable. Some kids have severe to profound. Some kids have unilateral. There was even 1 or 2 kids I knew that it was progressive hearing loss. But that's recessive. So the child has to get that gene from each parent. And I also found out that 1 in 8 of us is a carrier for that. So you could be you could have that gene, but unless you have a child with somebody who is also a carrier, then it doesn't matter. And for recessive deafness, for each pregnancy, there's a 25% chance that they'll have that condition. If it's dominant gene, it's a 50% chance for each pregnancy. So in some families, you'll see 1 or 2 kids who have it. In some families, you'll see 1 kid. And in some families, you'll see all kids or all kids but 1. I've seen a lot. It's also a variability. And then non-genetic is trauma before or during birth, low birth weight, prematurity, again, bacterial and viral infections. Meningitis is really, it said it was really common, but I don't know if it's as common as it used to be. Ear infections that go untreated would go into bacterial meningitis, and usually it was a severe hearing loss. Then there's what, 1/3 or 40%, they're unknown. You never know, and they keep doing research to reduce that number. And I gave you this just because I'm not going to go through it, but if you get a copy of the handouts, then you can use it as a reference. But it goes into more detail about CMV, Down syndrome, meningitis, ototoxicity, which is from drugs. Like when I worked in Memphis, there was a baby that had a lot of problems, and in order to save his life, they gave him loop diuretics, which if you administer them another way, they're not ototoxic. But in order to save his life, they had to do this, and then he had a profound hearing loss, but he survived, so that was awesome. And then Usher syndrome, and then there's Waardenburg, Becky. It says 20% have white forelock, but I thought that was much higher than that. So anyway, you guys can have fun with that. So types of hearing loss, there's conductive, and that's usually just a problem with loudness. It can't, it's transmission because there's a blockage in the ear canal. You can have a conductive loss because you have too much earwax in your ear. The middle ear, if you have an ear infection, it's just that the sound can't get around it. But if it's loud, once it's loud enough, it can get through, and it can, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with the sound coming through. With conductive hearing loss, sometimes it can be treated medically or surgically. So whenever you see a child with a hearing loss, you have to make sure that it's not something that can be medically or surgically treated. Sensory neural loss, that's caused by problems in the inner ear, usually with the missing hair cells in the cochlea, or the cochlea is not completely formed, or there's other structures that aren't formed well. And then 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we did this thing called otoacoustic emissions. And when that test was discovered, they found out that there was another type of hearing loss, and it's called auditory neuropathy. It has to do with the hearing nerve. So sensory neural really should be sensory is the cochlea, and neural is the auditory neuropathy. And there's nothing you can do for neither one of those can be treated medically or surgically. And then central loss is when you remember the auditory pathways I showed you. There's something that maybe wasn't developed or matured, or something was going wrong. And it's not very common, but I did know we did have a student that his hearing sensitivity was normal. Every test we did was normal, but he could not understand speech at all. And so he was a student here and he did quite well. But it was always interesting because, usually audiologists can say, oh, you have this type of hearing loss, and we couldn't. It's like his sensitivity is perfectly normal. But there was somewhere on the auditory pathway that was preventing him from hearing, from his brain from getting the information it needed. And this is, again, I tend to overkill with information. This is just sort of a different way to say that, all that. Oh, and you can also have a mixed hearing loss where you could have a sensory loss, your hair cells are missing, but then you keep getting ear infections. Or you have a sensory loss and your ear canal wasn't completely formed. So that's a mixed loss. All right, so now the audiogram looks a little different. And it's different from the other one is because now we're going to chop it up and show the degrees of hearing loss. So 0 to 15 is considered normal, and this is for children. For adults, it's 0 to 25. The children are learning speech and language, and so they need that better hearing. There's a slight or minimal, and that's in the green. A mild loss is in the yellow. The moderate, orange. Moderate, severe, red. Severe is, did you say that's fuchsia? And the profound is that purple? Purple or a funky blue? People always get on me about my colors. I don't think I'm colorblind, but I always call them different than what everybody else says. Anyway, so that's profound. And the thing about this is it's straight across, but you will see hearing loss like that, but a lot of times you'll have the hearing loss will start off in the yellow, in the low pitches, and it will just slope down and end up in the high frequencies in the purple. That's more common. So you have you would call that a mild sloping to profound, or a moderate sloping to severe, or a mild to moderate hearing loss. I don't see many that are just, it's a moderate loss or it's a severe loss, but they are there. Okay. These are some examples. There's a speech banana, but it's a bit lower. It's supposed to be covering all the speech sounds. And then the string bean would be on top of there. And I thought this was funny. It said quiet bedroom at night, but the guy's, it looks like he's snoring because of Z's. So I don't think that would be, it would not be quiet. But the circle is the right ear, the X is the left ear. And it starts off at 50, at 250. So that's moderate, at low pitch, low frequency. And it slopes down in the mid-range to severe and ends up in severe. So you call it moderate to severe bilateral hearing loss. Most likely sensory neuro, but we don't know until we do bone conduction. Leaf blower, that's pretty, sorry, it's really loud. And they're severe to profound. So it starts off in severe and then goes to profound. And for both of those hearing losses, the speech information, speech energy, the speech frequencies are out of bounds. This is called the ski slope. And it's showing 0, which, can happen. So you have normal hearing in the low pitches. So you're going to get vowel information. But by the time you start to get in the mid pitches, you're down to moderate or moderately severe. And then the next octave, it's profound. I mean, 120 is the highest we test. So you get no consonant. You could probably hear that somebody was talking. You'd hear a lot of environmental noise. You could hear some vowels, but you couldn't probably understand what people were saying. And I did this just to show you how the different configurations, like the sloping, the rising. Now there, you're going to lose some vowel information, but you're going to get a lot of consonants. So a lot of times you can understand what people are saying. And then the flat, and then the unilateral, where one ear is normal and one ear is not. And then again, some of these are very interesting, the different kind of shapes. And then the cookie bite, Jack and I had talked about, this is probably the main one you see with familial hearing loss, that runs in the family. I think they also call it the bucket or the handle, bucket handle, where it dips down. So you get low frequency information, you get high frequency information, but in the middle is, you know, it will prevent you from learning to understanding words. So effects of hearing loss on speech and language without intervention. I'm just checking on our time, sorry. So a slight hearing loss or unilateral, and I have to say that any kind of hearing loss in a classroom, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So this says it sounds like slight or only one ear, but it's still significant. And again, coming from an educational audiologist, some people may not agree with me, but they may miss some consonants, mild difficulty with auditory language, and learning at a distance and in noise is always a problem for all people. Well, actually, for everybody with normal hearing, and then even more so with people with hearing loss. And mild hearing loss, that's around 30 to 40. They'll hear louder speech. In fact, I tested a kid, he was in 2nd grade. He'd been in speech therapy for 3 or 4 years and he wasn't progressing. And I tested his hearing and he had a mild hearing loss, and nobody knew it. So yeah, he could hear speech and he could compensate enough to get by. Moderate hearing loss, they hear hardly any speech sounds at normal levels, and then you might start hearing it in their speech. And then severe, you could hear how when they speak, how it changes the way they speak. They probably have some delays. They probably wouldn't hear their name called unless you shouted. And then profound hearing loss, you know, they hardly get any kind of acoustic cues from their hearing. This is all unaided. And then again, this is for you. And if you want a better copy, it's Success for Children with Hearing Loss. Karen Anderson is an audiologist. And it's her website, and she's awesome. But you can download this stuff. It's really great for teachers, for audiologists, speech language pathologists. It's really good. But it covers psychosocial impact of hearing loss, the effect of hearing loss in speech and language, and then possible educational needs. Okay, this is the unilateral. Because at one time it was like, oh, you have one good ear, you're good. But they realized that is not true. And children with developmental issues related to hearing normally in only one ear do not outgrow them by school age. They're at risk, 10 times the risk for school problems as kids with 2 good ears. A third to half of children will repeat a grade or require special education services, will have learning disabilities. It's variable, it just depends on the child, but it's something that needs to be taken seriously. They also have, they won't be able to localize. Oh, go ahead, Becky, I'm sorry.
I just had a comment. Chris and I have experienced this just this year with young students who have a unilateral loss, and school systems will oftentimes say, or, you know, the educational team, someone will make a recommendation that the child doesn't need services under special education because it's just a unilateral loss. And at the age of 3, well, they're not academically showing any deficits. Well, my response to that, our response to that is preschool is academic readiness. So they can't show definite deficits in academics if they're just getting ready for them. And because of all of the things that they're going to be missing out on in the classroom, the way that they interact in their classroom environment is not commensurate with their hearing peers. They satisfy the eligibility criteria for hearing impaired. I know that's the phrase that Tennessee uses.
Yeah.
But it, you know, if you are a member of an educational team, and there's some discussion about a student having a unilateral loss, and oh, well, their needs can be met through a 504. Not always. I mean, I think that people want to, oftentimes teams and sometimes school staff will think that one-sided, one good ear, they're good to go. But as we know, as the research is showing us, they are still at risk and they are not performing on a level commensurate. And I'm using the language of the criteria purposefully with their hearing peers. So as a member of the team, you can come armed with that information.
Yeah, that's awesome. And a lot of times, especially in the past, they didn't get fit with any kind of application or any kind of devices or any kind of accommodations in the classroom. And it will affect them for the rest of their lives. They do not have the ability to hear in noise, even if they can hear in quiet, and they cannot localize. So their spatial hearing is not good. So thank you, Becky. That was very good. That's some things that you need to address. So thank you for that. So failure to detect congenital or acquired hearing loss in children. So I talked about 1 or 2 in 1,000 who have hearing loss at birth. But by the time kids are 5, it's like 2 or 3 times that. So there is acquired hearing loss. They can get it from illness. There's some genetics. And that's why all kids need to have their hearing tested. And I always believe parents, it upsets me when it used to be, and it's changing, but it used to be, oh, they'll grow out of it. Oh, they don't want to talk yet. They will. So anyway, okay, I'll get off my soapbox. And again, it used to be that children weren't identified until they were 2 or 3 years old. And now that has changed a lot. And that's awesome. And now they can be identified and into early intervention by 6 months of age. And these are hearing loss simulations. I'm just going to do this one. This is Flintstones. This is much better. I feel like I'm talking too much. Whoops, sorry. Sorry about that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Can you guys see and hear that?
Building on Granite Avenue. You owe me $300. Get it up?
Fred, take it easy. It's only a game.
Wilma, just like them big tycoons, I play to win. Now, Barney, pay up or get out of the game.
All right, now I hope I can. Oh, here we go. Sorry. All right, so what I want to say about that is, if you saw it, it had the configuration was higher in the low pitches, but if it was a true moderate or severe hearing loss, you would hear a lot less. You were getting the benefit. They were saying moderate, but the low pitches were in like the mild range. So just so you know, if you thought that was hard, it's really harder than that. So treatment options for hearing loss, there's hearing aids, and that's like one of the newer hearing aids, and then cochlear implants, and that's one of the newer cochlear implants. They both have rechargeable batteries and they have wireless connectivity. Yay, Bluetooth, which does have the limitations, but it's been great. You can connect to so many devices. It's really wirelessly. You're not like connected anymore. How does a hearing aid work? Well, sounds are picked up by a microphone. They're carried to a chip like computers. It's like a tiny computer. It processes the sound, makes it into a clear signal. They keep doing like advanced speech processing to make it clearer and easier to understand. And then it's delivered through the receiver and delivered to the ear mold and to the ear. How does a cochlear implant work? Sound waves enter the microphone. The processor converts the sound into a digital code. And then that electrical coded signal is transmitted across the skin, right there, through the headpiece to the internal portion of the device. So I'm just assuming that you guys all know about like cochlear implants are implanted. So this part here is implanted inside your head. The internal device delivers the sound to the electrodes, which is here, and the electrodes stimulate the hearing nerve, which is here. And then what does the hearing nerve do? It sends the signal to the brain. And that's like up close and personal. There's the microphone, there's the stimulator, that's magnetic connection here, and then the electrode array, and then the auditory nerve. So how are they different? Well, the hearing aid acoustically, so it takes the sound that we hear and makes it louder. The cochlear implant takes that sound and converts it into electrical signals. Because really that's what happens inside the cochlea, it's electrical activity anyway. The hearing aid relies on the responsiveness of healthy inner ear sensory cells, the hair cells I told you. So if you don't have them or they're damaged, the hearing aid just has to work with what's there. And that's why a hearing aid doesn't always work with people who have extensive damage, like severe or profound hearing loss. The cochlear implant bypasses the damaged area and stimulates the hearing nerve directly. Now you have to have a good hearing nerve in order for that to work. But sometimes with auditory neuropathy, with the hearing nerve, it can either be small or it's not firing the way it should. They'll still do a cochlear implant because the hearing aid won't really help. So sometimes they'll do a cochlear implant to see if, and it's successful sometimes. But that's just because the hearing nerve isn't working, and those kind of hearing losses can fluctuate. Those are the 3 cochlear implant companies in the United States. Medell's probably the latest one to come over. It's big in Europe. And here's the simulation. I just want to show you quickly. This is what they think it sounds like for hearing people. It's not necessarily what people with a cochlear implant hear, but they did it so that we would satisfy our curiosity about what it sounds like. And you can play around with these. I would Google cochlear implant simulations, hearing loss simulations. There's a lot out there, and some you can kind of download and play around yourself. Okay, let's do want to do a woman's voice? This is the simulation of the cochlear implant.
A cup of sugar makes sweet fudge. A cup of sugar.
Sorry. So do you know what she said? This is what she said.
A cup of sugar makes sweet fudge.
So it's just, to us, it sounds kind of muffled and electronic, but with a person who has that in their head, their brain, the brain has great plasticity, and it will, eventually it will sound normal to them. Even people like who've heard acoustically all their lives and maybe lost their hearing, get a cochlear implant, and then they say it sounds normal. And music is the biggest probably drawback for cochlear implants because of I think it's the spectral timing. They're working on it, but this is what hear that? That's a song. Okay, so this is what it really is. So there you go. They're working on that, but yeah. And there's probably some music that's better to listen to than others. Okay, so the cochlear, oh, go ahead, Becky.
Real quick, I know I'm asking a lot of questions.
No, I like it. Thank you.
But when a kid is in the classroom that has a cochlear implant and they have headphones at the little computer station in the classroom, does it help them to put headphones on if they have cochlear implants?
No, it does not. In
What
fact,
about-
with
okay.
Bluetooth, yeah, Bluetooth is really helping because then, and before then they could connect with FM. But yeah, headphones, it's not good to use headphones for a kid with really any kind of assistive listening device. But thank
So
you for
there
that.
should, with newer devices, newer hearing aids, there's the ability to connect via Bluetooth to most devices if they have that functionality. And was it on an app? Was it one child's cochlear implant or hearing aids were controlled by an app?
Well, all the new ones have apps,
Okay,
but you don't like kids can connect to their phone and stream music into their device wirelessly. We've had some complaints because the kids will be doing that during class time. Which I think is awesome, actually, that they're actually doing that. But yeah, you can use the app to control it, but just to connect to Bluetooth like a computer, you don't need an app. But yeah, an app, with the apps, they're so cool because you can control the device itself. You can make it louder, softer. You can change the frequency response. They have some that will, if you lose it, it'll tell you where it is. You can get phone calls in your device, play music, stream anything. It's really good.
thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Okay, so cochlear implant is not a cure. You can get the device and the potential is there, but there's a lot of hard work. Rehabilitation is the key. You have to retrain your brain. You have to get those auditory pathways working. And it's like everyday practice, working your ears out. But eventually you can get there if you keep up with the hard work. You can't just put it on and go, oh, it's fine. So one of the responsibilities of the educational audiologist, or really the teacher of the deaf, or whoever's speech pathologist, who's ever working with the child, is to make sure the devices are working every day. So daily listening checks. And again, you guys need any information, I can give you a printout of what you need to do. We can come do an in-service, whatever you like. Daily listening checks. Battery's usually the biggest. Test the battery. Check the ear mold if there is one. You can listen to the hearing aid. You can listen to the microphone on a cochlear implant to make sure the mic is working. Look for any cracks or frayed cords. If there's a battery door, check it. A lot of the devices for kids blink, and if you need to know what does green flashing mean, what does orange flashing mean, I can get those for you too. Filter check, that's not so much current anymore. Hearing aids used to have filters. I think cochlear implants still have mic filters. And if you can change them, I think you have to change them every 3 to 6 months. And check the ear hook for cracks. And that would be an issue with the hearing aid. If you had a cracked ear hook for a cochlear implant, it would just probably fall off your ear. It doesn't affect the way you hear. One of the ways to do a listening check is the Ling 6 sounds. So see where the circles, there are 6 sounds, and you say those sounds to the child and have them repeat. And there's also cards if they can point to pictures. So you go, and they have to go, back. And I have picture cards if you need those too. But it's one way to make sure that they're hearing what they're supposed to be hearing. And that covers the speech banana, the speech spectrum. How important is classroom listening? So when you're in kids in public school, if you don't have an interpreter, 2/3 of their day consists of listening and participating in spoken communication. So there needs to be, their listening environment needs to be free of acoustic and non-acoustic barriers. The ideal listening environment is the teacher's voice is clearly audible, easily heard. There's little background noise, good room acoustics. This is sort of a fictional story, just kidding. Most classrooms do not have good acoustics. Good room acoustics is good attenuation of sound from outside noise sources. That means you stand in the classroom and you can't hear kids passing in the hallway or somebody outside. Reverberation, the echo in the classroom, is not too little, not too much. I was at a school on Wednesday, and is it the intercom? The PA came over, and that thing was so loud. I was just like, it hurt my ears. So that would not, that I would consider that noise. It was almost so loud it was distorted. So speech understanding in younger children. The auditory system is still developing. It won't be fully developed until their late teens, like older than 15. Which is good news for kids with auditory processing, because if you catch it soon enough, you can do therapy and change it so that they no longer have problems. And because of that, children don't process sound as well as older children or adults. Their knowledge base of language is not fully developed, and they can't fill in the missing pieces like we do. And younger children require better signal, which speech quality to understand signal. So speech to noise ratio to understand speech well. That means that the signal you want to listen to has to be a certain loudness above all the noise that you don't want to listen to. So what's the problem? The problem is distance. So in the average classroom, the teacher is 6 to 10 feet from the first row. For all the distance from the teacher, you double the distance from the teacher and you decrease your sound level by 6 decibels, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. Remember logarithmic? The background noise, by the time you get to the 3rd or 4th row, the background noise will probably be louder than the speech for the child in that row. So distance, and these are problems for typical hearing kids. We would struggle in those classrooms. Background noise. Most children with hearing loss need the level of the speech to be 15 to 20 decibels at least above the noise in order to understand. So let's say a teacher's voice is 65, which would probably be like this. So that would be more like louder conversational level. Background noise at 60 decibels in a classroom is not unrealistic. It can be that loud and sometimes louder. And Becky and I, when we go, I always pull out the sound level meter and try to, measure the noise in the room. So if the teacher's speaking at 65 and the background noise is 60, then the signal to noise ratio is only 5. That's awful. That's what I test in the sound booth to see how bad people fall apart in noise. So it's not good. Oops, can you guys see that? No, well, let me do that now. It will not. Okay, so this is a visual representation of loudness, speech to noise ratios. So plus 15, there's your boat. There's all the sounds you need to hear. The sounds are fully audible. Plus 15. Plus 6, then you can hear some of the louder vowels and parts of consonants, but all the others are kind of muddied. You can't really see them. And then if you go to where the speech and noise are about equal, then you can't, none of those, you can't distinguish any of those sounds. So if you add noise and distance, that's a big problem. And a lot of empty classrooms are already noisy because outside noise, the windows aren't great. There's HVAC, there's a loud projector. I mean, there's just, it already has noise and you haven't even added the kids yet. So the back of a typical classroom with no children present, the signal to noise ratio is +1 dB. That's terrible. So you add children and the background noise is going to be at least 45. So, and now you get a speech to noise ratio of -3. And then it talks about the farther the talker moves away from the listener, then it decreases every 6 decibels. So you start at 65 and you end up at 36. Which is very soft. So the point is noise and distance is a problem. Go ahead, Becky.
And I would like to say that oftentimes we will go on school visits and the classroom teacher will say, oh, they don't need that microphone. They don't wear it anyway, you know. But even if it's not sometimes it's not working. And so the student is just kind of like, I don't, you know, but if we fit them with one that works, it's like night and day. I mean, if the student is old enough and able to express the difference and how they're like, wow, you know, but that's a good, I like the boat with the, you know, here's the kid in the front of the class, here's the kid in the middle of the class. And if you put a deaf or a hard of hearing child trying to filter through all of that background noise in the back of the class, they're like a boat underwater. And also with FM systems, you know, teachers, maybe at one point in time, they could sit at a desk and teach, but, you know, they, as part of the evaluation, they have to be moving around the classroom. So localizing that sound, it really reduces the amount of work that the student has to do if the teacher consistently wears the microphone and the student uses the FM system. So just in case you ever need that explanation, when they are walking around the classroom, it's going to be really difficult for that student with hearing loss to figure out, you know, where the sound is coming from. And then they have to access the academics. I mean, all that work is even before they are at the point where they can access the academics. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I appreciate that very much. And I'm going to talk about that when we get into the little fatigue, because it'll wear you out if you have to do all that. So this affects teachers too, because they have to adjust their voices. So it contributes to increased vocal fatigue and strain. And they've had a lot of absenteeism for teachers because their voices, they have a lot of throat problems, voice problems, they get sick. So it's also hard on the teachers too. The other problem is reverberation, and that's like an echo. So the sound bounces around a room. For typical listeners, the best reverberation times are 0.6 seconds, nothing above that. And speech will slur if it's above that. And let me show you a visual representation. So look at that. Can you imagine trying to listen in that classroom? The sound is bouncing all around. I don't know if you've been anywhere where it's really echoey. It's hard to hear. So it's hard ceilings, tall ceilings, acoustic ceiling tiles have been painted. Walls and floors that don't have carpet, that all have hard edges. I feel like a broken record sometimes when we go on school visits, because I'm like, you need carpet. You need a window covering. But yeah, most classrooms, they just don't think of that. And I read where they say architects are deaf because they would never build a building that didn't have light, but they build buildings all the time that don't accommodate sound. So the overall problem is combining all three, and they usually all come together. So if for typical listeners, +6 signal to noise ratio, you're going to see at least a 9% decrease in speech recognition. That's the ability to understand what they're saying. The reverberation time is 0.7 or higher. And if you combine those two, then the scores decreased by as much as 20%. And this has been going on for like 30, 40 years, the study of this. The student in the back of the room is a huge disadvantage, even if they're typical hearing. This is a visual representation of reverberation, the smearing of the sound. So you see at 0 milliseconds, you can understand it, You get down to 75. My brother just moved. Can you guys read that? Anyway, but that's it's really hard. You got to really stop and stare and try to figure out what that is. And we're adults. I mean, we know, we know our speech and language is intact. But some kids who haven't learned those words yet, they would really struggle, or are learning words. Children cannot listen like adults. They can't compensate for the smearing effects of reverberation. They need a better signal to noise ratio because noise and reverberation work together to create an adverse listening and learning environment. Like I said, I say things over and over again. And I apologize for this slide because I can't figure out how not to do that. It's very dramatic. So classroom acoustics. This is for typical hearing people, kids, typical hearing kids. All typical hearing. The newer, more difficult to task, the greater the chance for noise interference. Can you read that, Rachel? Sorry. It's more than a simple masking effect. Slower reading acquisition, phonemic perception, and reading comprehension. So for typical hearing kids, classroom acoustic effects will hinder their reading acquisition. It's learned helplessness because they kind of, lack of perseverance for difficult tasks. They just because it's just too difficult. Attention issues, and they get distracted. And then that's typical hearing kids. Well, children with hearing loss, they're at a bigger disadvantage, and they're affected much more by noise and reverberation. So impaired speech.
Wait, Krista, real
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
There, again, when we were talking about the eligibility, they are more affected by classroom noise than their hearing peers.
Yes.
So
much
there
more.
again is that they are functioning on a level not commensurate. It doesn't mean less, it just means not the same. So their experience in the classroom is not the same as their hearing peers.
That's right.
Making sure information is power when you're on the educational team.
Yeah, that's right. Very, very true. And I touch on that. I know I'm kind of running. I don't want to make people stay for an hour and a half. So, but I do touch on that too. It talks about that. But impaired speech perception, because of bad acoustics, affects others too. Non-native English speakers, kids with language deficits, all kids with hearing loss. even kids with minimal hearing loss, kids with ADD, auditory processing, of course, because that's their number one issue with auditory processing for most people, kids, is hearing and noise. Conductive hearing loss, normal hearing with history of ear infections. There's your unilateral hearing loss. Learning disabled, and any kid younger than 15. That's a lot of kids. So again, conclusion, it's just saying that excessive noise, reverberation, and distance are significant barriers to effective learning. And adults don't always understand because they hear better in noise than children do. Signal to noise ratio, no less than +15, that's normal hearing, +20 for kids with a hearing loss, but +30 is even better. And then the noise in the classroom contributes to the vocal strain of the teacher. And it's much cheaper and easier to build a classroom with good acoustics, but it just doesn't really happen. And again, you reduce the noise, you can acoustically treat. Like I said, I have a handout that says things you can do to the classroom: curtains, carpet, acoustical tiles, tennis balls on the chair, the legs of the chair. You can do things with the teacher and the student. But FM is really good. Remote mic technology is really good. Sound field amplification is okay, but it's not good for kids with hearing loss. It's good for kids with typical hearing. Why FM? Because it's like the teacher speaking in your ear. So if kids have to, they concentrate on listening. And if you don't have FM, and you're really trying hard to listen, everything else is going to be compromised. And I will show you that in the listening fatigue. So auditory, the detrimental effects of poor acoustics is decreased when you use FM on auditory comprehension, learning behavior, speech recognition, and also the teacher's vocal health. Benefits. See, they've done, it's 1991. They've done a lot of research. So there's the multi-mic. This is the touchscreen mic. This is new, not new. This is current. These are receivers that they can actually download into the hearing aid. So this is all the student has to wear. And this is a rechargeable aid. And then there's the teacher with this. So it's improved attention span, just decreased distractibility, and increased speech discrimination. And then extensive research shows that children with hearing loss experience listening difficulties with their hearing aids. So you can't, your daily listening check, the hearing aid's working great, it's on the kid, they're still at a disadvantage. Sometimes even still with FM. And like Becky was saying, it's not equal with the peers. And again, classroom noise. This is a remote mic, one of them. It's smaller than FM, and it's FM DM. FM is the analog, that's an old term. DM is digital, and it's the newest term. But because we're so stuck in our ways, you have to at least say FM DM. You have to preface DM with FM or people won't understand. But this is a remote mic. It's small. It's cheaper than FM. It doesn't have the range FM does, but it's equivalent to FM unless the classroom is really noisy, like above 70 decibels. So, and kids get that with their hearing aids and their cochlear implants, and sometimes it's a better option because of cost. Yeah, mainly cost. So in the classroom, listening comprehension ability of children with hearing loss are typically lower than those of typical hearing due to the effort used to listen. Because that effort decreases the cognitive resources available to understand what was heard. This will impact their ability to follow directions. So if you use all your energy just to understand what the words they're saying, you're giving all that energy and you're not really, the ability to follow what they're saying is compromised. So the hearing loss creates barriers to learning in the typical classroom, and it typically causes cumulative learning gaps due to incidental learning or overhearing, because they don't get that. Some of the helpful tips are recognizing the student will only be hearing fragments of what you say and will take longer to process information. Compare this to listening to talk radio when someone with a heavy accent is talking. You can hear and you know the words, but it takes longer and more effort to comprehend. My example is when I moved to Memphis. I did not understand, I'm from Iowa, the Midwest. I didn't understand a word anyone said for a week. I would just smile and nod my head. And eventually my brain went, oh, this is this Southern accent, you can do this. So now I can usually understand anybody, but that was so profound for me because I'm like, they're speaking English. Why can't I understand what they're saying? And it was kind of exhausting, but anyway, it worked, got through that. So they can listen or look, but not both. They can't look at written material or take notes and still comprehend what you're saying. So they can look at you and understand what you're saying, or they can take notes. But if they take notes and you're talking, they can't do both. That's why a good accommodation a lot of times is to get a note taker or to give the student notes afterwards. And it's always good to break down the information, to give it in chunks, because that helps too. Helps to organize it, make it more manageable. So learning issues are due to decreased communication access, not learning disabilities. Academic success is driven by communication access. So communication access is very important.
Krista, sorry to interrupt. Jack has a
No.
question.
Yes, go ahead. I can't see him, so go ahead.
So you mentioned about the noise and everything. We had a teacher give out a paper to a student, the notes, and they weren't able to cover everything with the notes. So another strategy is for the teacher to hand them all of the notes. Just write them all out and hand it straight to them.
That I agree. That
Instead
should
of
be,
line by line.
yes. I agree. It should be all of it. Yeah. They don't always agree with me, but I agree with you, Jack, that yeah, they should do that. Are we good? Okay. All right. So it takes more effort to learn when there are communication access issues. Lip reading and preferential seating don't make up for it. Sorry. We still say that. And lip reading is really hard, and nobody's good at it. So we should not expect students to do that. Although we should always give them visual cues and access to the teacher, but we shouldn't expect them to be able to do it. And students with hearing loss often need different teaching strategies for deep learning to occur. Not just the same stuff over and over again. They cannot process speech at the same speed or level of comprehension when there are multiple talkers or it is noisy. Do you have a question, Becky?
Yeah, I wanted to comment. Recently I read in some literature that curriculum is written for the typically hearing student. And the assumption is made by curriculum writers that the student has had access to all of the years of background information and have been able to file that away in their brains. So by the time they get to school, there's all these assumptions. Well, we know for deaf and hard of hearing students, they do not have access to all that background information. It is not tutoring. It is specialized instruction to do pre-teaching and post-teaching. You have to set up the prior knowledge. You have to establish something for them to hang the lesson on, especially if it's, you know, they have not had any experience with that. And then you have to revisit that content and make sure that those connections were made successfully. I read in a book one time, now this is with probably adults, but a counselor was counseling and he was, you know, helping this person who was experiencing addiction. And he kept signing relapse. Like the counselor was signing no voice, and this was to a deaf client, kept signing relapse, you know, what are your triggers for relapse, you know? And the client was nodding their head. And, you understand? Yes, I understand. Well, they got all the way to the end of the session, and the deaf client got the counselor's attention and said, who fell down?
That's funny.
So the sign for relapse also looks like fall down. So that client just, you know, imagine if this is an adult who has had experiences, even though they're deaf, they've gone through school, had experiences. But imagine how that would be for a child to try to, you know, oh, that means fall down, and it also means relapse, you know, I mean, because relapse is used in different contexts. But anyway, I always go back to that, and I remember my days in the classroom, and just all this explaining and experiences and everything, and inevitably you would get to the post teaching, and someone was like, oh, by the way, you said CNN tells lies. Now, this was years ago. Now, that's a big thing, but years ago. And I was like, I never said that, you know. But anyway, so you just have to be careful. School curriculum is structured for children who have lots of prior knowledge. And so it's not tutoring to do a pre and a post teaching session.
That's awesome. I think you should go on the road with that. That's awesome, Becky.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so all this ends up in, this is a fairly recent issue. No, it's always been around. It's fairly recently studied. Vanderbilt has taken it, and they're doing a lot of studies on listening fatigue, because they realized children with hearing loss, they've been reporting feeling physically and are mentally tired because of trying to listen. Teachers have seen it in their classrooms. Parents have noticed it too. And, you know, sometimes it means taking off their devices as soon as they get out of school, taking a nap immediately when they get home. That's what I usually ask parents. You know, I ask them how they're doing with their hearing aids. And I say, when they get home from school, do they just want to take a nap? Avoiding noisy social situations, you know, because they're tired. They're tired of listening. It's fatigue is associated with poor ability to pay attention and concentrate, slower mental processing, and impaired decision making. And this can happen during school hours. And it impacts cognitive processing, how your brain functions. It can result in recurrent fatigue because it's caused by the strain of listening with the hearing loss. And it's associated with reduced academic performance in children. So it's causing them not to do as well. And any degree of hearing loss, with or without amplification, results in a greater effort to listen. So like Becky was saying, not same as their typical hearing peers. Not less, just different. And that's that wonderful website I was telling you about, Success for Kids with Hearing Loss. So the recent research has shown that the simple act of listening and understanding can be exhausting. There's challenges because most classrooms have poor acoustics with significant reverberation times, think echo, and elevated background noise. They have to listen to multiple talkers throughout the day. And all the while multitasking by listening and performing other functions such as note-taking. And some of the behaviors are they fall asleep in the car, they take naps after school, changes in behavior, like they start acting out when they're at home. They just kind of go wild. They zone out during the day. They take devices off. They have difficulty following instructions, or they're, not motivated, not paying attention. So what can you do? Well, this isn't the only thing you can do. There's a lot of other things, but you can give them brief listening breaks. Consider the classroom acoustics. Try to accommodate their listening environment first instead of trying to change them. You can schedule time without listening activities. Try FM or remote mic. It might make it easier. And this person, their opinion was that the FM would really help, just because it makes it easier to listen. But I don't think that's end all and be all. I think you have to do everything that you can. And there's my contact information, email, my work phone, my cell phone. And like I said, I even have Becky, I think I gave it to you. It's the listening fatigue scale or inventory or something, but you can use it, and you can score it, and you can actually see if it's a problem. Of course, if the kid's having issues, it's probably a problem anyway. But if you needed something to convince the staff or your boss or whatever, we can get that for you. We have a lot of stuff. So anybody else have questions? Okay.
Hey, it's been wonderful. Sorry, I was putting my sound on. And I wanted everybody to know, there's so much to learn. Wow, great information was packed today. Thank you so much, Krista, for leading us today. And so some of the names. Sorry.
So for me, I grew up hard of hearing. And just being able to hear everything, it's kind of a blur. Sometimes it's very fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know exactly what was being said. Other people always thought oh, wait, you can hear? And I would say, yes, I can hear, but I don't always understand it all. I don't understand I can't comprehend the message sometimes. But great work. Thank you so much.
Good job. Thank you. Becky? Oh, you're muted. Oh, sorry.
I also want to say thank you to Krista. I think oftentimes we can get so hung up on the instructional side of things that we actually do sometimes forget to take into consideration what the hearing loss actually physically does. I mean, it can exhaust the child. There's all these sound waves bouncing around. I mean, those are actual physical things that are going on, aside from instructional issues and maintaining skill levels and mastering state standards or whatever. So I think it's important to remember these things. It's important as your role on the educational team for your student. I know that oftentimes, I think we have a lot of educational interpreters with us tonight, or at least one I'm seeing on there, and you have to be able to advocate for your student. I talked about this last time, but there's the triangle graph, the inverted triangle, and the right side up triangle, that the educational interpreter, when the child is young, has a greater responsibility. And as they get older, those responsibilities shift and become more on the student. But it's our jobs as teachers of the deaf, as classroom teachers, as educational interpreters, SLPs, to advocate for our students, especially at the level of administration, because oftentimes there are so many things going on with their administrators. Special education is huge. Deafness, hard of hearing, is a low incidence. So, but there are if you want to succeed, if we're interested in all children all the time, then we have to make sure that we advocate for our deaf and hard of hearing students, because they are part of those, all children, all the time. So I just want to empower you guys as members of the educational team, diplomatically and professionally, but always I want you to be empowered to advocate for your students. Before we close, thanks again, Krista. Thank you, Marianne
Thank
and
you.
Rachel, our interpreters. Did a
Yeah, you guys
fantastic
did great.
job. I will email a PDF of Krista's presentation and slides. Also, I'll have certificate of completion. As soon as I get that back from our creative services, I will email each of you who participated tonight a certificate of completion. And we have another one next month in May, and Jack is presenting that night, and it is about environmental language and the needs of children in, you know, the least restrictive environment versus language rich environment. So we hope that all of you, some of you said you're already registered. We're really excited about that. So we look forward to seeing you next month, and that is May, going to make sure I have the date right, May 12th. Thursday, May 12th.
Awesome.
So do we have any questions or anything before we go? I didn't see any in the chat. So does everybody want to turn your cameras on and wave before
Sure, you can do
before
that.
you
Yeah.
leave? Here we go.
Oh, awesome. Yay.
Hello, friends. Yes.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next month. Same time, same
Sounds
place.
good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.